On this day in history, we remember the remarkable individuals who shaped our world. Welcome to Who Died Today in History, where we honor their legacies. From artists to leaders, their impact lives on. If you find their stories meaningful, like, subscribe, and hit the bell to stay connected.
Thank you to all our amazing channel members for your generous support.
Stevie Ray Vaughan, one of the most electrifying guitarists in American music history, died tragically in a helicopter crash on August 27, 1990, at the age of 35. His death was sudden, accidental, and devastating, not only for his family and fans, but also for the blues and rock communities, which had just witnessed his remarkable resurgence after years of struggle with addiction. Vaughan had performed earlier that evening with Eric Clapton, Robert Cray, Buddy Guy, and his brother Jimmy Vaughan at Alpine Valley Music Theater in Wisconsin. When the helicopter carrying him and several crew members crashed into a fog-shrouded hillside shortly after takeoff, the world lost an artist whose career, though relatively brief, had already transformed modern blues. The violent nature of Vaughan's death reflected both the unpredictability of life on the road for musicians and the broader realities of a late 20th century music culture defined by relentless touring schedules and high demand for live performance. Unlike legends whose lives were lost to drugs or violence, Vaughan's passing came just as he had overcome personal demons. He had become sober in the mid-1980s, a transformation that revitalized his artistry and personal life. His death, therefore, carried an especially poignant sense of irony. Just as he had reclaimed control of his destiny, fate intervened in a way that underscored the fragility of human existence. The immediate consequences of his passing were profound. Fans and fellow musicians alike were stunned, and tributes poured in from across the world. His death cemented his legend, elevating him into the pantheon of artists whose lives ended abruptly but whose work achieved mythic status. Albums like Texas Flood and Couldn't Stand the Weather took on new layers of meaning, becoming both a celebration of his genius and a lament for what more might have been. His influence only grew after his death, inspiring countless guitarists who saw him as a bridge between the traditional blues of Muddy Waters and the fiery innovation of Jimi Hendrix. Vaughan's death reveals much about humanity's relationship with mortality, memory, and power. We are reminded that even immense talent cannot escape life's uncertainties, but through music, artists achieve a kind of immortality. Vaughan is remembered not only in recordings and live footage, but also through statues, tributes, and countless musicians who carry his style forward. His story illustrates how we honor the departed by keeping their art alive, ensuring that death does not silence their voice, but instead amplifies it across generations. In this way, Stevie Ray Vaughan remains eternal, a symbol of redemption, artistry, and the enduring power of the blues. Gracie Allen, the beloved American comedian and actress, passed away on August 27, 1964, at the age of 69. Her death was the result of a long battle with heart disease, a natural end that contrasted sharply with the vitality and quick wit she projected throughout her career. Known for her sparkling comic timing alongside her husband George Burns, Allen had retired from show business in 1958 due to declining health, but her public persona remained etched in the minds of millions. Unlike many entertainment figures whose lives ended in scandal or sudden tragedy, Allen's passing reflected the quieter, more private challenges of aging and illness in mid-20th century America, an era when the burdens of health were often faced discreetly and out of the public eye. The immediate consequences of her death were felt most deeply by fans who had grown up listening to the Burns and Allen show on radio or watching it transition successfully to television. Allen represented not just humor but also a sense of stability in American popular culture. Her comedy, often built around playful misunderstandings and clever wordplay, offered escapism during the Depression and World War II, cementing her as a comforting presence in uncertain times. When she passed, tributes highlighted not only her talent, but also her role as half of one of the most enduring partnerships in entertainment history. George Burns, devastated but ever loyal, would go on to honor her memory for the rest of his long life, often speaking of her with deep affection in interviews and even incorporating her presence into his later performances. Allen's death amplified her legend in a subtle yet powerful way. By leaving the stage before her health struggles became widely visible, she preserved the image of the witty, sparkling comedian that audiences cherished. This allowed her legacy to remain largely untarnished, her memory fixed in the cultural imagination as eternally sharp, charming, and radiant. In doing so, she embodied a different kind of immortality, one shaped not by tragedy, but by a graceful exit and enduring affection. Her passing highlights humanity's ongoing relationship with mortality, memory, and power. While death underscores the limits of human life, figures like Gracie Allen live on because we choose to remember them, not only through recordings and reruns, but also through anecdotes, biographies, and George Burns's lifelong devotion. By celebrating her humor, we reaffirm the human desire to find joy even in hardship. Gracie Allen's story reminds us that while death is inevitable, laughter and love can transcend time, offering a form of immortality far more enduring than flesh. Jinx Falkenburg, once hailed as one of America's first true media celebrities, died on August 27, 2003, at the age of 84. Her passing was attributed to natural causes, marking the quiet end of a life that had once been dazzlingly public. Unlike many Hollywood contemporaries whose deaths were marred by scandal or violence, Falkenburg's exit reflected the inevitable fading of an era, the decline of mid-20th century celebrity culture shaped by radio, early television, and the glamour of post-war America. In the 1930s and 1940s, Falkenburg had embodied the ideal of American femininity, a model, actress, and radio personality whose beauty and charm made her a household name. She and her husband, Tex McCrary, became pioneers of the talk show format, blending news, politics, and entertainment into engaging broadcasts that reached millions. By the time of her death, however, the landscape of fame had shifted dramatically, with television and internet culture reshaping the idea of celebrity. In this sense, her passing was symbolic of how quickly eras of fame can vanish, leaving behind the memory of trailblazers who laid the foundation for what followed. The immediate consequences of Falkenburg's death were modest in scope. Unlike the deaths of movie icons such as Marilyn Monroe or James Dean, her passing did not dominate headlines or spark cultural upheaval. Yet within media and broadcasting circles, her death prompted a re-evaluation of her pioneering role. She was remembered not just as a glamorous figure, but as someone who helped transform media into an intimate part of everyday life. Her interviews brought political and cultural leaders directly into American homes, foreshadowing the integration of entertainment and news that remains central to media today. Her legacy was amplified in a quieter way, through historical reflection rather than sensational mourning. Falkenburg's image as both a glamorous Hollywood beauty and a serious media figure highlighted the transitional role women were beginning to play in American society during the mid-20th century, moving beyond ornamental roles toward influence and professionalism. Her story underscores humanity's relationship with mortality and memory in a unique way. While she may not have achieved the mythic immortality of larger-than-life stars, Falkenburg demonstrates how cultural influence can be preserved through historical recognition. We immortalize such figures not only through film and photographs, but also through acknowledgement of their contributions to shaping modern media. In remembering Jinx Falkenburg, we are reminded that not all legacies burn with sensational tragedy. Some endure more quietly, through the steady shaping of culture and memory across generations. Brian Epstein, often referred to as the Fifth Beatle, died on August 27, 1967, at the age of 32 from an accidental overdose of sleeping pills combined with alcohol. His death was officially ruled unintentional, yet it reflected both the pressures of fame in the 1960s and the limited understanding of mental health during that era. Epstein had long struggled with depression, loneliness, and the burden of managing the world's most famous band, all while navigating the secrecy surrounding his sexuality at a time when homosexuality was still criminalized in Britain. His passing illuminated the darker realities behind the glittering surface of the swinging 60s. The immediate consequences of Epstein's death were profound, particularly for the Beatles. As their manager, he had been the steadying force who transformed them from a Liverpool club act into a global phenomenon. Without his guidance, the group began drifting into internal conflicts and business entanglements that would eventually contribute to their breakup just a few years later. Many historians view his death as the turning point that marked the beginning of the Beatles' unraveling, shifting them from a unified creative force into individuals pursuing divergent paths. Epstein's death also amplified his legend. While he was never a performer, his behind-the-scenes role became increasingly recognized as vital to the Beatles' success. He represented the new kind of power broker in the music industry, someone who understood branding, image, and mass appeal in ways that anticipated modern celebrity management. In his absence, fans and cultural critics alike came to appreciate how much his influence had shaped not only the Beatles' trajectory, but also the very landscape of popular music. Reflecting on Epstein's passing reveals how mortality intersects with fame, power, and memory. His death highlights the fragility of those who stand behind cultural icons, often unseen but indispensable. It also speaks to humanity's tendency to reassess contributions more deeply in retrospect, elevating figures whose impact may not have been fully appreciated during their lifetimes. Today, Epstein is immortalized in biographies, documentaries, and dramatizations that celebrate his vision. While he did not live to see the Beatles' enduring legacy, his own role in their story ensures that he remains inseparable from their myth. In remembering Brian Epstein, we recognize how even those outside the spotlight can profoundly shape cultural history, and how death can both end and secure a legacy. Greg Morris, best remembered for his role as Barney Collier on the television series Mission: Impossible, died on August 27, 1996, at the age of 62. His death came after a long battle with brain cancer, making it a natural but difficult end to a life lived in the public eye. In many ways, his passing reflected the challenges of his era. The limited medical treatments available for aggressive cancers in the 1990s, and the struggles of African American performers who had spent their careers breaking barriers in Hollywood while carrying the weight of representation. Morris's role in Mission: Impossible during the 1960s was groundbreaking. At a time when racial tensions in the United States were intense, his casting as a highly intelligent, technologically gifted secret agent challenged prevailing stereotypes of black actors on screen. Unlike many roles offered to African Americans in that period, his character was not defined by race, but by skill, competence, and authority. His death, therefore, marked not just the loss of a beloved actor, but also the fading of a cultural pioneer whose career helped shift television toward greater inclusivity. The immediate consequence of Morris's passing was a wave of tributes from both colleagues and fans who remembered him as a trailblazer. His legacy was amplified by the continued popularity of Mission: Impossible, which by the 1990s had been revitalized through films. This ensured that Morris's contribution to the original series was reappraised and celebrated, solidifying his place in entertainment history. His passing reminded the industry of how far representation had come and how much further it needed to go. Morris's death also highlighted a broader cultural truth. Society often fully acknowledges the contributions of minority figures only in retrospect. While he received acclaim during his career, the deep appreciation for his pioneering role grew stronger after his death, as new generations looked back on how vital representation had been in reshaping cultural norms. In reflecting on Morris's passing, we see how humanity confronts mortality by preserving memory through art, commemoration, and storytelling. His work is immortalized in television reruns, retrospectives, and discussions of diversity in Hollywood. His death underscores that while individuals pass, their contributions endure, serving as both inspiration and reminder of the continuing struggle for equality and recognition in cultural history. Emma Pinella, born Manuela Ruiz Pinella in 1930, was one of Spain's most respected actresses, whose career spanned cinema, theater, and television. She died on August 27, 2007, at the age of 76, from complications of diabetes. Her passing was a natural one, yet it carried symbolic weight, marking the loss of an artist who had bridged Spain's tumultuous mid-20th century with its modern democratic identity. Her career reflected the challenges of her era. Coming of age during Francisco Franco's dictatorship, Pinella navigated an industry that was heavily censored and politically charged. Despite this, she emerged as one of the most versatile actresses of her generation, taking on roles that ranged from the melodramatic cinema of the 1950s and 1960s to gritty, socially conscious performances later in life. Her death from diabetes underscored how, even for cultural icons, the frailties of the human body remain inescapable. At the same time, it resonated with broader concerns in Spain about aging, healthcare, and how the nation remembered those who shaped its cultural voice. The immediate consequence of Pinella's passing was a wave of tributes from Spain's artistic community, many of whom saw her as a figure who had endured the limitations of censorship, yet still carved out an authentic and lasting artistic identity. Her later roles in popular television series, such as Aquí no hay quien viva, introduced her to a new generation of fans. This ensured that her death was not seen as the fading of an old screen star, but as the loss of a contemporary, relevant voice in Spanish popular culture. Her passing also amplified her legend in an important way. She came to embody resilience and adaptability. Unlike some performers whose work is tied to a single era, Pinella's career evolution mirrored Spain's own transformation. From dictatorship to democracy, from a conservative cultural climate to one of greater openness. Her death reminded the public of that shared journey. In reflecting on Pinella's life and death, we see humanity's deep need to connect memory with identity. We immortalize such figures through cinema archives, televised tributes, and retrospectives that ensure their contributions endure. In doing so, we acknowledge that mortality need not erase influence. Rather, it can sharpen our recognition of how an artist's life story reflects both personal talent and the broader cultural struggles of their time. W.E.B. Du Bois, one of the most influential intellectuals and activists of the 20th century, died on August 27, 1963, in Accra, Ghana, at the age of 95. His death was from natural causes, complications of old age, but the timing was profoundly symbolic. Just one day after his passing, Martin Luther King Jr. delivered his "I Have a Dream" speech at the March on Washington. Du Bois's departure, therefore, seemed almost fated, linking the first great architect of Black liberation thought with the rising tide of the modern civil rights movement. Du Bois's life had been defined by the challenges and values of his era. Born in 1868, just after the Civil War, he experienced firsthand both the promise of Reconstruction and the crushing rise of Jim Crow segregation. His death in Ghana, where he had moved in his later years after becoming disillusioned with American racism, reflected his lifelong search for dignity and equality for people of African descent. His decision to spend his final years in Africa also symbolized the global dimensions of the struggle for racial justice. As the African independence movements of the 1950s and 1960s paralleled the battles being waged by Black Americans. The immediate consequences of Du Bois's death were both somber and galvanizing. In the United States, civil rights leaders paid tribute to him as a pioneer whose scholarship and activism, particularly The Souls of Black Folk, 1903, and his role in founding the NAACP, had laid the intellectual and organizational groundwork for their movement. His passing underscored the continuity of struggle, bridging the generations of Black resistance. For Ghana and other parts of Africa, his death highlighted the deep cultural and political ties between the African diaspora and the continent itself, reinforcing Pan-African ideals that Du Bois had championed for decades. Du Bois's death amplified his legend. By dying on the eve of one of America's greatest civil rights demonstrations, his life's work became inseparable from the broader narrative of freedom and justice. He was remembered not simply as a scholar but as a global activist, a visionary whose legacy transcended borders. In reflecting on his passing, we are reminded of how humanity immortalizes such figures through education, literature, and public commemoration. Statues, academic centers, and readings of his works ensure Du Bois's voice continues to resonate. His death illustrates how mortality can transform influence into legacy, revealing our enduring need to preserve memory, confront injustice, and honor those who dared to reimagine the meaning of freedom.